Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is I want to talk about something that I think I don't know why, but people don't seem to understand is that all of us are wrapped up in some kind of a social circle. And that sets up a certain kind of tribe, right? All of us, including people who preach about nonconformity. They're usually setting up their own tribe. So I don't understand why people don't realize this. First of all of us have a stance or a sense of truth. And sometimes this is more intellectual, sometimes it's more feeling oriented, but it's definitely an aspect of ego. And anybody who denies this is 100% full of shit, right? Nobody is like godlike in character as a finite perspective. All right. So, and this can block love if people think this way. I'm godlike in character with regard to my finite perspective. So, in other words, the way that I'm showing up in the world, my ego is perfect, even though I don't admit that I have an ego. See, this is total ignorance in fantasy, right? So, you have to realize that you are showing up as a finite perspective to even move into love from a feminine perspective. Because from a feminine perspective, you're trying to get along with other egos, with other perspectives. Because the feminine is not generally about the mind, it's about the body. So it's about the human, it's about the finite. So if you can't even move into feminine love, where you realize that all of us are imperfect and we all do nasty things to each other on occasion, and none of us are godlike on some level, then you're just going to be this kind of pretentious, pedantic cult leader, asshole, manipulator your whole life, playing semantic games with people, trying to control people because you yourself can't move into feminine love. That's really the problem. It's always been the problem with you, right? For some reason. Because to move beyond truth into love requires vulnerability. It requires humility. It requires ethics. It requires a desire to want to be more ethical. If you just want to play games and preach and, be a chameleon, then go ahead and just, play your truth games, right? You're never going to move into feminine love. Now, you might ask yourself, like, well, what does feminine love mean? Like, why is it feminine love? Okay. Well, this is all, I've created these stages in terms of development work because I've moved through these stages. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to share, my path and, what I've learned. And what I learned pretty fast is that feeling and intellect can block love. Both feeling and intellect. If you're too attached to feeling, right, you're an unconscious ego that's basically just attached to your own feeling. If you're too attached to intellect, you're an unconscious ego that's basically just too attached to your own intellect. And not even. And these can block love. And they can cause you to go on the warpath with people who disagree with you, right? Because you have this tribal mentality, like me versus you or us versus them. And you're listening to other people telling you something, right? So Be careful of people who preach about nonconformity, but they want your conformity, or they're going to ban you. Right? They're going to kick you out. If you disagree with them, they're going to kick you out, but they preach about nonconformity. You got to realize that egos lie. This is the one thing about all egos, is egos lie. And you lie. You have to accept your own lies, right, to move into love. If you can't accept your own lies, like, how are you going to accept the lies of other people? You're not. You're going to be the victim. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, that person's lying. You're going to project. You're going to say, that person is lying, and I'm going to go on the warpath, and I'm going to expose their lies instead of really exposing your own lies first. That's a classic, mistake. We all do that. And everybody who's playing the role of the mirror is trying to do that to somebody else, right? But then people who are standing back and letting that happen, they're also doing that too. They're kind of tacitly trying to shame somebody, or they're still playing the same game. Don't ever assume that any ego is not playing this game, including your own. And the problem with truth is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's useful because it gives you a foundation to operate with, which is your spirituality. The downside of truth is it creates limiting beliefs and blocks that cause you, that basically block love. So in other words, it's like, oh, me versus this guy, or us versus them, or, this thing is victimizing me, or I'm the victim of this particular thing, or, right, you can see how this just goes on and on and on and on and on, which is the reality of the small self. But once you become enlightened and you recognize absolute truth, you realize this is not me, and this is just the way that this has to work. This is the way karma operates, this way. But this is not me, right? I am the consciousness that's observing all of this happening. So you get to this point of masculine truth in that sense. The problem with it is that it doesn't stick. And why doesn't it stick? Well, because there is no psychedelic that basically goes beyond, goes forever. Every psychedelic is time bound, right? First of all. Second of all, a psychedelic is basically just a state. So once you discover that everything is one, which is, I call feminine truth, that there really is no duality, or there really is no separate self even between everything that's here. That brings a certain kind of peace. The problem with this is that you don't live in this. You pretend to live in this. You're in a fantasy world. You pretend to live this way. This is the Neo-Advaita people, right? The no separate self people. Then you have the people who are everything is consciousness crew, right? These people deny the fact that they're a human being, that they're showing up in the world in a certain way. They victimize people. They shame people. They talk about non-conformity, but they want people secretly to be conformists to their point of view. These people are manipulators, and they don't even realize it. This is the downside of an unconscious ego. You cannot move into love and have an unconscious ego. I'm sorry. It will never, you're going to be limited, right? You'll have truth with the capital T, but you won't have love with the capital L. To have love with the capital L, it's a paradigm shift. It's not just a change in idea or a change in feeling. It's a fucking paradigm shift. And I'm saying it that way because I want you guys to realize this is not just the same old, same old. This requires a change. And what I'm going to do in the next part of this video is I'm going to explain what that change is. So just give me 1 second. All right, friends. So that introduction aside, let's talk a little bit about partial truth. So the masculine wants to be God. The feminine wants to be man. So the emotional scale of the feminine is analogous to the intellectual scale of the masculine. Notice this. So the masculine is always like, spare me your emotions. And the feminine is always like, spare me your thoughts. Notice that. And so when you're moving into feminine love, you have to realize that there are going to be assholes who are going to privilege emotions, and they're not going to want to hear your thoughts. They're going to be assholes that want to hear your thoughts, but they don't want to feel your emotions. But because of the fact that you don't see the bigger picture of how karma works, you don't realize that this is just the very nature of the finite perspective. And if you become too attached to these, which is, I think, is what a lot of spiritual enlightenment teachers who are teaching about love are pointing to, not teachers who are teaching truth, which is a lower down value. And obviously you need truth in order to have love properly. And we'll talk about that, the final third. If you're stuck on a partial truth, but you're denying that, and you're assuming an absolute perspective, like, who's the fool there? Right? You don't even see it. See, the thing about foolishness is that the person playing the fool doesn't even see that they're doing it. It's not that somebody is more intelligent than somebody else. It's that somebody can see the trap that somebody else can't. That's the issue. And if you're doing this, I think, authentically, then you're contributing wholesomely to spirituality. I think one of the traps of truth is that feeling and intellect can definitely block love and cause people to victimize other people, like cause you to attach to the finite perspective, thinking that it's the infinite perspective, and then playing the role of the preacher and the judger, right? And so when you do that, when you're stuck in truth, you're going to preach about nonconformity because you don't want, you're stuck in the finite perspective, wanting to purify yourself of all the other finite perspectives. But that's never going to happen in the finite perspective. This is what you don't get. So it's almost like you assume that there's a non-duality between the small self and the big self, but intellectually you don't recognize that. You see that you're only the big self. So you're like, sort of like, you got a blind spot there. All right. So, and because of the fact that you have a blind spot here, you're stuck in mirroring. You're stuck in mirroring. In other words, like, you're fighting, but you're attached to the fighting. Instead of realizing that there is a much more complicated thing going on there. And I'm not saying that it's wrong that you are fighting. Even in love. Love doesn't remove fighting. Right? Like, no relationship is without fighting. People who think that, oh, every relationship should be about peace, that's a hope. That's a belief. No, it's like every relationship, in samsara, right, or karma, with regard to the small self, it's all going to contain a certain degree of fighting. Even at the end of your life, you're going to be fighting to stay alive. You're going to be fighting to make money. You're going to be fighting to influence people. You're going to be fighting to be right. I mean, you're going to be fighting to strike at the enemy, right? Or collude together to strike at some enemy. That's just the nature of anybody who denies this is totally full of shit. people try to hide in on the internet, because nobody knows what they look like, nobody knows who they are. You can have some kind of perspective. All you do is make YouTube videos and you interact on a forum. People assume they know you, but that's a total fantasy. I don't know you. Unless I've hung out with you, I don't know you as a person. Only the people who I've hung out with who are real life relationships for me are the people that I know. Everybody else is just an avatar online. I don't know if you're a sock puppet account, right? I don't know anything about you. And honestly, on some level, I can't take you seriously on that basis. And so we're now in this kind of world where we're interfacing with people that we know personally and people who we don't know. And it's creating this kind of duality between like reality and fantasy now that has actually become our reality. In a way, we're in this like postmodern, condition that Baudrillard talked about, which is like we don't even know what's fantasy and what's real at this point. So we're in this kind of cross section now between what's fantasy and what's real. So it's definitely a different condition now than it was in the past. And I have online people that I've interacted with for 10 years. I don't even know what they look like. I don't know what their real name is. Right? I really don't know as much as I would want to know about them because I'm just interacting with Claude 101, right? On some forum somewhere. I don't even know who created this account. So but the thing is, why are you so hung up on being right in this condition? If you're really awake, this is all just a game. But not a game too. See, when I say just a game, people who lack truth and love, right, they're going to approach that from a masculine beauty perspective, and they're just going to play a game, right? And say, okay, well, I'm right. Well, no, that's a very superficial reading of my point of view. Because I definitely take it like you can't really properly move into love until you've really integrated truth. So don't forget that. You can't really properly move into beauty until you've integrated love. Don't forget that. So if you're in a masculine beauty perspective where you're like, okay, I'm just going to lie about somebody, I'm going to defame somebody online, I'm going to make somebody look bad, even with tacit consent. Well, that's not good because it lacks love and it lacks truth. And truth does not have a duality between absolute truth and relative truth. Right? So you don't forget about relative truth just because you've integrated absolute truth. In other words, absolute truth does not block facts, for example, or evidence, or what has happened, right? Chronologies. Absolute truth does not block all these things. If you think it does, then what that tells me is that you have no respect for relative truth, right? So you're like, anything goes. You become, and I find the people who are like this are actually online chameleons, ultimately. And they actually like that. For some reason, that's who they are, and so they build a spirituality that basically supports that kind of mentality for them. And for people who are really down in the dumps, right? either with mental illness or depression or something like that. So they forge themselves to be teachers for people who are really bad off, right? That really should be seeing a shrink or a psychiatrist or somebody like that. But they're living on this online forum as a kind of pseudo life. There are people like that online. So you have to realize that. And I think you have to have a degree. I think you should have a degree of like I feel bad for you guys, but I'm not I'm not one of you, and I don't necessarily want to be one of you, right? And this, I think, is when you reach kind of a masculine state of love, where it's like, it's not just about integrating love, it's about showing love. And sometimes the best way to show love is to leave a community. So if you're around somebody who's constantly negging everybody, right, because they haven't grown up, right, they're still a little kid, still immature, and they're just negging everybody because they learned this in, pickup artistry or something like that. Just negate everybody, make everybody feel inferior, and they just like they don't have any other game. That's the game that they learned. That's the game that they're going to continue to play. Then it's not bad to say I've outgrown you. Even if you still want to talk shit about me. Nobody wants to feel like somebody's outgrown them, right? But it happens in every context, if you think about it. Every art form, somebody can outgrow you. And I feel like this is the case with love. Like, I just feel like a lot of people, they're never going to move into this. And so the question becomes in the final third of this video, like, what is the difference between love and truth, right? Like, if you're like, okay, Joseph, like, just, you gave me the theory. Now tell me, like, what really is the difference between love and truth? Well, that's what I'm going to do in the final third of this video. So just give me 1 second. All right, friends, I'm back. So first of all, realize that truth is a prerequisite here. Like, if you don't have absolute truth, you can't move into absolute love. You're not going to have the abundance to be able to do this. So first of all, you have to be very secure in your truth, but in a way where you're like, see, you're not secure in your truth if you're worried about nonconformity, if you're worried about what other people think. All right. But you still have to have, right, an absolute truth. So you have this absolute truth, and where you move into love is you realize, I'm not going to play your truth games anymore. All right, this is masculine love. All right, so now we're moving in, more into like kind of Zen. So masculine love is like, I'm not going to play your truth games anymore, right? Like, I understand truth through and through. And I understand the limitations of integration too. Like, you're putting all this pressure on yourself. Well, I got to integrate this or integrate that. Well, yeah, that could be, but it could also be like just a bunch of limiting beliefs and thoughts that you have in your mind. So once you get to masculine love, you're basically, you're looking at everybody in a way as a potential friend. Like, all of you are my buds. That doesn't mean I want to hang out with you all the time, right? That doesn't even mean that I want to hang out with you once. But I get it, dude. And actually, the thing I get is all this politics, all this spirituality, all this me versus you, us versus them. All of this is a block to love. And the thing is, you may say to yourself, well, what if somebody doesn't reciprocate? Well, then you can still take the high road. You can still be the person who cracks a joke. Like, so for example, I have friends that are extremely right-wing. I have friends that are extremely left-wing. I have friends that, you know what I'm saying, that are of every aspect of things, because I have a very kind of wide perspective with regard to love. That doesn't mean that I want to hang out with these people, right? Don't confuse that. But what it means is that fundamentally, I'm not hung up with on truth with regard to you, right? I'm not even hung up with regard to integration with regard to you. I look at it like, you're the same as me. We're all here. We're all doing the best that we can. We're all observing ourselves. Karma is playing itself out. We should not be shaming anybody, right? We should be liberating people and giving people love. I mean, some people, they do deserve to be shamed, but in a limited way. Like, okay, if you lie about somebody, like you legitimately lie about somebody, okay, that's one thing, right? That's bad karma for you, actually. It has nothing to do with me. You're going to sit with that because, see, the way karma works is that really there is no separation between anything. So when you do something bad to something, that thing is already in you. So you're never going to forget that. That's going to become something that you carry with you, right? So when you bully somebody, it doesn't hurt them, it hurts you. Because you're going to carry that. You're going to know, right? I did this horrible thing to somebody else. You're going to live with that. And that's going to keep you from reaching a place of abundance. So you don't really want to engage anybody really in a negative way. I mean, ideally it would be like, unless you're growing. If you're growing or you're teaching, think about those though, growing, teaching, and how those might be different. But if you're teaching, I would reconsider that on some level, because the thing is that your feeling and your intellect can block love. And you're going to see people as devils, right? You're going to feel a victim of those. And so you're going to preach about a kind of nonconformity. You're going to mirror them and you're going to try to defeat them by fixing them. And you're going to put yourself on a pedestal, right? As like, I'm God, you're man. You're going to deny the fact that you're man. And you're going to basically be arrogant and pretentious. But all these block love. But I will say it's a paradox. On the one hand, people who aren't ready for love, you may or may not want to stay away from these people. I mean, watch the people that you hang out with on some level, right? Because people can do some nasty things to you, right? Like defame you or physically assault you, or, I mean, God knows like the degree of nastiness that people can engage in, or just tell everybody that you're wrong, right? Or tell everybody that you're ignorant or something like that, right? Every system has a survival component to it. And if it sees you as a devil, it's going to treat you like one without higher consciousness. So this is the point. Like, to move from truth to love, you have to stop seeing finite perspectives as devils. Period. Even if somebody did something nasty to you, there's an explanation for that. They wouldn't have done that but for feeling like it was right for them to do. Right? So it doesn't make sense to really criticize anybody for anything that they've done. But you still have a choice, who you decide to interface with, though, too, paradoxically. So keep that in mind. But, to spot the error in somebody else, like ultimately, comes down to spotting the error in yourself, which is basically what makes love possible. Because you can realize from a finite perspective, it doesn't make sense that anybody's perfect, including you. and then you can let go. And that allows you to use humor. It allows you to bypass, people when they like fixate on truth and they're trying to put stakes in the ground. You can realize this person just doesn't have abundance. They're insecure, either from a systemic cause or from a psychological cause. Like they have to toe this line. And you have to make a choice then, like you have to decide, how much contact you want with this kind of a person. But I also think don't take yourself off the hook of trying to get along with them. The way to get along with them is not to agree with them. So for example, if I'm interfacing with an extreme right winger or extreme left winger, I don't want to agree with them. But what I'll do is I'll use humor to create a relation with them and empathy so that I can have a relation with them that doesn't depend on truth alone. Okay, friends? Hopefully this gets through. I know this is something, a lot of you guys that think that love is basically just a feature of truth. You're not going to get this. I'm doing my best to try to explain that actually there's a really deep trench between absolute truth and absolute love. Like they're different paradigms almost. It's like, yes, they're the same, and yes, they're different too, right? So, and not even. All right. And so what not even means, this isn't the end of the road. All right. But I think, and I don't even want to say what's beyond this, right? Because I just feel like if I give all of the story, everybody wants to assume that they're at the very top, right? So there is something to be said for going step by step by step by step. When you're explaining something, if you give everybody the big picture right away, everybody's just going to assume they're at the very top instead of realizing yes and no, right? There's also a process. There's you go from A to B to C to D and so on, right? Because life is about learning and development. Some of us older folk, I'm going to be 48 in 2 months. Some of us older folk tend to even acknowledge the fact that we're still growing and learning. Just like a little baby or a little kid. No, it's like you're growing and learning your whole life. If you're fortunate enough to live to 95, you have grown and learned for 95 years, as opposed to somebody like me who's 47, almost 48. So, it's paradoxical, this stuff. All right, friends? Hopefully this is a good video. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.